So just in sort of in general terms, how you define community?
Well, geez, I guess I try not to. I think it's, sort of a loaded word that a lot of people would already put expectations on or connotations beyond any definition you could give it. I'm thinking it's important to live it. And then within that, I think in this life, I don't think humanity was born into this world to be individuals as a species. I think we were born to work collectively. Mm-hmm. So that means communicating. That means mutual support. That means trying to figure out how to make a livelihood. So that's, I think, a broad way to look at it. And then I think we can all find, degrees of community or the community that we would like to see in this world within that, rather than putting some sort of definition on it that is less, more exclusive. I'd like the definition to be as inclusive as possible, because there's quite a bit of ways to define community.
Right. So you're thinking that the sort of more general definition of community is limiting, and that if you look at it just as sort of like the general sort of semantic interpretation, that it doesn't necessarily mean what you think the community should be, which is that that it's a true, at the root of the word, looking at like it's the commune and everybody being in for a common purpose, but yet meeting their individual needs.
Well, yeah, I think there is definitely an element of mutual support and common goals to certain elements of community, but we also have a global community. I guess our mutual goal is survival and the betterment of humanity, but
You like to think so.
Yeah. Yeah, I would hate to throw some sort of definition upon it. I think it's an open interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, and that's probably very wise to think of how, like when you say to people that haven't really actively think about it, they immediately think of, where they grew up, or they think of community where they belong, like an education, or they think of the learning communities. So it has such broad application that, if you're not really thinking about it in terms of what it means to someone's humanity. And I really agree with you about that whole thing about, that we're, as a species, we're really, as I used to say to my students when I was teaching, human beings are herd animals, and that there's very few people that are really happy if they're not part of the herd. So, in some context, right?
No, I don't think so. I think it's also ultimately a necessity.
What do you think is the role of the individual within, community in the broad context?
I think you just need to recognize your capacities and your limitations and try to find the proper role for you that suits you within the community. I think there's people that are more outspoken, more assertive, and then there's people that are more intuitive and more sort of patient and slower in their thought process and decision making. And I think that's just that being an example, we all need to identify how we're going to interrelate and make room for one another.
And so this sort of answers, what do you think is the role and responsibility of the individual within a community? I mean, we talked about that. I think that sort of is, your larger answer already addressed that. And then there's the other flip side of that is what is the community's role and responsibility in meeting the needs of the individual?
Well, I think the livelihood, we'd like to be able to mutually support people so that they're not impoverished or malnourished. There's a roof over everyone's head, and they have the opportunity to work for their livelihood and participate for their livelihood. I think the community owes that to everyone to give an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. How far do you think that the support of the community should go in taking care of its individual members, if it has the capacity?
Well, I think, I think the capacity to a degree, it has to be, there's a balance sheet that we have to look at. And if someone is investing a large degree of their financially or with their time, with their experience, then justifiably there has to be some recuperation if necessary. We owe to the individual at least what they've put in, to recoup. So if a person put in 5-10 years of work, that's maybe a fifth or sixth of their lifetime. You're looking at you could owe that person quite a bit in sort of security and well-being.
Yeah. You can look at that. When I'm talking about community like that, it's really that sort of slide from looking at community as like a large social structure as opposed to like a smaller entity. And when you look at it as a large social structure, then it very quickly can be, come in to be, what is society's role? It depends on how you define community and society, and my thoughts have always been when I think of community on a large scale, like even thinking of the United States as its community. So then my socialistic, leanings all come out, where think of universal health care, or a certain, as you said, for exchange of work and devotion for the community, certain standard of support. And so, whenever I hear these arguments, for Congress that they want to cut benefits for, for instance, Social Security, it just seems like it's a sort of undermining of, the larger community of us as a social structure.
No, I think it's quite necessary. Mutual support at all levels.
Right. One thing I forgot to do was to introduce us, because, of course, Josh and I have talked before, and I'm talking to the camera now, and that, so this is Josh Trought, who's the director of D-Acres, which is a educational homestead and permaculture farm, and as well as an intentional community. And I am Suzanne Moberly, who is interviewing Josh as part of my externship for my dissertation work. So I'll probably get taken off on that. But anyway, now, so part of the other things I want to talk to you about is one of the times when I came down, and we've always had really, I think, very interesting and meaningful conversations. But when I had spent some time down here a few weeks ago, and then we were talking about that, the community as a symbiotic relationship between the larger social structure and the lives of individual members. And one of the people that kept coming up in some of my research that I've been doing was I was talking about this guy, Victor Turner, who wrote Structure and Anti-Structure. And he made this statement about intentional communities, saying that intentional communities develop out of periodic reclassification of reality and man's relationship to society, nature, and culture. It carries members of the group from one culturally defined state to another, from one structure to another. So how do you see this concept evolving within the social and functional structure of D-Acres as a whole? And I'm sort of interested is that when you came about to the point where the idea of D-Acres began to crystallize in your mind, and because you put enormous amount of work into taking, that theory and moving it into reality, that, how you've sort of seen that shift, is, I guess, the reclassification of reality is probably a good place to start.
Well, to me, I was really intrigued by, I guess, I'm wondering where Victor got his, how he's basing this. What events or what communities, how, it sounds like it's almost looking at something like the internet age, or, like these different renaissances through history. But it's an interesting concept. I mean, to me...
well, if you look, that's 1969, so he was probably studying communes that developed out of the, subculture of the 60s and early 70s.
But I think that the sort of gist of what he was going for then that something would change, that would actually carry people from one defined state to another, which I'm not sure has actually transpired. You know what I mean? Like, I think there was a lot of intention around that period, and thousands of intentional communities were formed during that period that, the success rate hasn't been good, in terms of. So it's a really interesting quote and concept, I suppose. Yeah. I mean, for me, in terms of where I'm at, the intention has never really it's never been anticipated to develop this place, the land, into an intentional community. I think that has evolved through the process of looking at the alternatives. This land is currently in private ownership, but I don't think we would like to figure out a way to share this land, and so there has to be some intention to that, in terms of future direction of leadership, of ownership, of governance, of decision making. And so to develop a formula, I think we're exploring the opportunities and the alternatives and some of the formulas that exist out there. And the phraseology, intentional community, applies to some of these formulas that I think we're looking at. But in terms of this organization started out as a nonprofit and a service organization, and then as the element of personnel, it's very intrinsic, and as over time we really look to ways to stabilize personnel, and so I think we're trying to match the personnel with the land, and therefore provide a livelihood to the personnel on a shared ownership land base. And I think that might describe what we do a little bit more adequately than intentional community. Because I do really think this specific case, we do have a land-based educational mission, as opposed to strictly the intention of living together.
Right.
So it's a
you got a specific focus, and a philosophy and purpose that everything revolves around. Yeah, I think that's interesting how, that, you talk about that it wasn't necessarily what you had in mind, but then realizing that, the whole thing about personnel and having the man or woman power to make things work, that, that you didn't want just people sort of constantly folding in and out like they were, like farmhands, that you wanted a deeper level of commitment. So then that's where that whole sense of, and of course, intentional community is sort of a catch-all phrase for a lot of different types of, can be anything, really falls into that. So you're, it's interesting how to see how your intentions have coalesced as you've evolved. Because you've been, D Acres is how old? 50 years old or more?
1997 is when we got started, so it would be the 16th.
Yeah.
But I guess too, in terms of like the intention of the organization, is to become a part of the broader community of this valley, of this watershed, of the state of New Hampshire and New England. So I think there's a couple of different layers of that too. Mm-hmm. And we really don't want to develop anything that resembles something like an island or something that's isolated,
it's separate. Yeah, and and our previous conversations were, your own and like for instance your parents' involvement in town activities, and town politics, and some of the things that you're doing is what is it? You're involved with the PEMI. What is that? The waste management?
Solid Waste District.
Yeah, which is a huge issue, especially for a rural community. And so, and that all that works to keep you, the community and your own sort of sense of where you fit into that, integrated into the larger community. So, and then it's clear from just when I've been here that the acceptance of D Acres into the larger community, at least it seems to be. And I talked to your mom about it too, and she was saying that there was a lot of support, because one of the reasons was, which is a positive thing, is that a lot of the community is worried about what's going to happen to the land around here. Like if current landholders sell off, and we were talking about being close enough to Plymouth and some other places where large tracts of land could be developed, and that would really change the the complexion of the larger community of Dorchester. So anyway, it's interesting how and D Acres is, because you have a large tract of land that you're preserving. That's a really positive thing, and also looking at other ways to help people figure out ways for land conservation and that kind of stuff. Is your mom was talking about that. I know I haven't talked to you about that very much.
There's a lot to talk about.
I know, it's very large. More than what we have time for in this interview. So let's moving right along. So one of the challenges with an intentional community is how to maintain a balance between the needs of the community and the individual, and you talked about that. And so you have what the community needs to keep moving along, and then the needs of any individual, especially if they've been involved with you for a long period of time, because it's just natural for humans to move towards some level of self-actualization. And so how do you consciously work to balance this process within the demands of what the larger community of the organization needs, and then with the needs of the individual?
Well, I think that has to come through dialogue. You have weekly meetings and so forth, but you also have more in-depth personnel meetings every 6 weeks, every 3 months. Sit down and try to delve into I guess you're talking about the self-actualization or personnel needs. Mm-hmm. That's one strategy to try to get that, draw that information out. But I think, on the individual basis, I think when we get into this type of format, where there's, it's really important to bring forth the information that is relevant to you, that is important to you, that you're looking to meet your individual goals. You have to express them at some level. So within a community, that's very important, that people come forth and sort of define their expectations, mm-hmm. so that others around them are aware of them. we can work towards them collectively.
So it's interesting. I like, that's intriguing. Talking about, looking at it from personnel perspective, which is very necessary. Because there's a lot of business involved, keeping all that running along, and then an organization, assignment of duties, and who's doing what, and then how to also say it's like when you do an performance evaluation on employees, and you say, so what are your goals for next year? So the idea of the people, if their own personal aspirations or their expectations aren't being voiced, like how, that creates a problem. And then, and the balance of having to address people on a personal level and also as a business, because I think that that's something unique to this situation, is it's, the commitment is more than just a business. It's more than just a job. It's like, it's like an avocation when people come into it for the time that they're here.
Yeah, it's definitely more than a job. More than a job.
Yeah. And so one of the things we had talked about before was how intentional communities often either fail or succeed by the perception of the individual members, as their leader, so to speak, as like a charismatic leader or someone that they admire, and that you see that happen in all sorts of organizations. And then,
boy, we want to start talking through history too. There's some famous people born about 2,000 years ago and stuff that really had some, this whole leadership and trying to, with the whole hierarchy,
right,
send people onto platforms and pedestals, and it's an interesting process.
Yeah.
Really, it's almost like a cultural thing that you put someone is put in the spotlight, the limelight, the leadership direction, and they're either praised or demonized. Mm-hmm. There's really seldom in between.
Right. And it's interesting, when you talk about that, because you're the director, but yet it seems like a lot of what you try to do is to try to operate as a non-hierarchical structure.
Right. Really try to be inclusive. I think it's important for decision making is try to be as inclusive as possible. So
when we had talked about, you had a former employee before that had left and had been voiced some unpleasant statements when he left, that you were distressed about this, that because that his sort of view of you as the leader, that you were unaware that he was, that he had these perceptions, or and it also must be like on like another level, sort of distressing to find out that you try to be inclusive and try to be non-hierarchical, but yet, despite what you've done for that you still get put in that position, and by certain individuals, and then it's like you don't even know what failure you're being set up for.
Well, I think the same could be said in contrast. I mean, because this organization does have legal responsibilities, and we still have this employee relationship, and we still have a board of directors, and ultimately the director is the director.
Right, responsible.
It isn't a level playing field. It's not like we have a consensus situation here. I think we would like to be inclusive, but the ability to operate in a consensus format is just not there. And to me, consensus is a very rare situation that you could actually provide the format to allow a consensus process to happen. Because normally, I think it is fair to give people who are invested more heavily or have more experience more credibility and more authority in the decision-making process. So, to me, a situation where 10 people come together and all put 10 peas into the pot, and it is fair and equitable from the beginning, is very rare.
Right.
I think there's situations where you can work into situations where there is equity, fairness amongst players who have come at it from different angles and with different investments. But I think it's important to recognize people's investments and experience in the decision-making process. So, as long as there is that hierarchy, as long as that still exists, until we've reached the level of trust and intimacies that's going to allow us to really share power and decision-making authority at a very horizontal level, until we gain that level, there's always going to be an authority. And unfortunately, authority gets all the credit and all the blame. So that's where it lies.
Yeah.
There's not any way to skirt that responsibility, and I wish we could share it, but currently we're trying to work towards that. So.
Right.
You can't get somewhere unless you try.
That larger, you mean working towards like sort of a more realistic level of group decision making?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And something that's, I think we're transparent as we go here in trying to get it so it's more equitable. But I think equity also recognizes fairness. Mm-hmm. And there's within the decision-making process, I think you have to recognize various levels of authority or responsibility.
Mm-hmm. I think it's because the last time we talked about it, it was right after Scott, a former employee, had left, and you were just sort of processing that. So now that you've had some time to be away from that, how do you have any other additional insight into that situation?
Well, for me, I wake up every morning and try to do a better job, and I'm not sure there's anything necessarily I could do to improve the trajectory of certain people's stay at the Acres. It's something that they define themselves. Mm-hmm. And while I play a role in how people process their time, I guess one of the main things I've come to be disturbed about is it does seem like there's a trend in our society to leave jobs or experiences pissed off. I find it's very rare that I find people that are happy with their college or their college experience. Really? It doesn't seem like that's always the case.
I mean, like the transition is that, like you can't just say, this has been great, but I feel like I need to move on to something else and wish you all well. It is interesting. It's an interesting point. Yeah.
No, people arrive at college and they're super psyched. They love everything about it. But 4 years later, everything sucks. They're ready to get the heck out of there.
Jeez, I feel like I've been at PSU forever and I still like it.
Well, it's different, I think, when you're...
at this level.
Yeah, coming back to school of your own volition and so forth, and finding things of your own volition. But, like, in general, people are leaving their places of employment and not super excited.
Yes.
We're not good at breaking up.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So then it's hard to know, and especially if people aren't voicing their, what's going on with them, then how do you know? Yeah. You must have this sort of sixth sense at this point of see it coming, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but it's real hard to intercede as well, because you sort of have to let people go through their own process and to sort of speak as if you're able to perceive. their feelings, I think is you got to know your limits as well.
And and do you think that maybe sometimes the sort of more heightened emotion that it has involved some of the breakups, so to speak, has been because your people are working together, and then also living together, and in a fairly close environment, and a lot of socializing occurs together, that kind of thing. So,
yeah, when you break up in any sort of relationship, and this is like a dream. It's profoundly, it's intimate in many respects. You look at, you see people 24 hours a day. You get to know them at their best and their worst. You eat their cooking. You make a mess on something they've cleaned up. Very much.
Yeah, that's
very
interesting.
much. I think when we look at, our intention here is, in some ways, to offer people a social support network that's an alternative to the marriage structure. When I was growing up, I'm very happy that my parents had stuck together, but it was always, peaches and cream, and they worked very hard to stick together, and I realized that the marriage rate is probably around 50% success rate,
Right.
which is, you can get better odds in Las Vegas or whatever in terms of success. And that to me is startling, that we would be so, that's the only alternative to, and it's just such a formula that I think it's hard to imagine that we're all, that's the only option, and the only option is such a crappy success rate. It just is amazing to me. So I think what this place is part of the evolution to find some alternatives that allow people to have a livelihood and a support network and love and intimacy without necessarily the mortgage or the marriage thing is just, it's a pretty serious commitment.
Right.
And it's all or nothing, you know what I mean? You don't have, there's it's a pretty tough thing to not have any other alternatives out there.
Yeah, and I think that's really astute observation that part of the appeal of not only D acres but sort of other intentional communities as a whole is that especially American society tends to be very isolating in a lot of ways. I mean, some people are very successful in developing community connections and feeling like that they that they're connected to where they live, and their neighborhoods, they have friends and a support network. But yet there are so many people that don't. And it doesn't mean I don't mean to imply that people who come here don't have that, but it's just that it is like a built-in where you're coming into an existing community.
Yeah, I think it's hard. It would be hard to maintain intergenerational community in America right now, with how transient people are, with the cost of living, with the zoning. There's a ton of limitations to why small neighborhoods are not the community support mechanism they could be. Why suburbia? Why areas of New York City have changed and no longer have the sense and flavor of community. Gentrification radically is changing Brooklyn as we speak. Right. The black communities that have been there for generations are getting moved out by hipster kids.
I think that's one thing that's unique in a way. Not that my current level of investigation is that extensive, but the way that D Acres is structured is to still maintain that connection to a larger community, as however that is defined, whether it's Dorchester, a larger Plymouth area, like a farming community, and then and I'm sure that you're aware that there's there's other intentional communities that are developed even in New Hampshire that are still. What's sort of interesting is that they've set themselves up so they're separate. You know, they're an intentional community, but yet people live in there. It's like a little isolated little bubble. You know, like there's one that is in the process of developing in Henniker where people buy into it and they build communal housing, and it's the idea that they have a certain amount of, I guess, socialization with each other, but that they form that kind of what would be called family and neighborhood support that used to exist, in former times. So it's going to be interesting to see how a community like that, how they negotiate that, like how much they're integrated into the larger community. So I think the fact that you've already sort of thought that through and are really clear on, where you want to be on that, that's really important.
Yeah, I think some people are trying to buy their way into a small town living, mm-hmm. and it's, I think you need to go into a small town and invest in being a community member to get that experience. I mean, moving in here, we're still not accepted as we could, as we will be, generations from now, but it's definitely a process that people will come to accept you. You can't just roll into town and sort of buy this respect.
That's right. And we've all heard that when, in small towns where somebody that's, not from there, when they run for public office, and then they get that resistance. And, we've, having both had that experience, we know exactly how that works. Very interesting. And one of I think one of the strengths that I can see of The Acres is that that concept that we talked about before. It's called communitas, shared common purpose. Mm-hmm. So that's obviously what draws individuals here, and it keeps you going. And how do you, as the sort of founder and director, how do you keep that sort of energy alive around that purpose? And there's one thing before you answer that question I want to say as an observation, is last Sunday when Scarlett and I were here for the community breakfast, and we were out looking at the pigs and you were giving the tour. It was really cool to see I was eavesdropping on your tour there, and the level of energy that you have when you're explaining this, and you're educating people about, like what the whole process of use of the land and integration of animals and human relationship to animals, and it was I could see you giving a pep talk for some farming organization, but it was great, and people were really into it too. So your sense of purpose and focus, was really passionate. And how do you sustain that over time, and within this environment?
Well, at some level, I really don't think we have much choice. I have a lot of urgency and a lot of anxiety based on the future of this planet and our relationship, how we're treating the whole place, and treating each other. And so, I think that to address these issues, we need people who are willing to accept the challenge of becoming in a leadership role or expressing themselves passionately. So, so there's two things. You accept that other people are going to listen to what you have to say, and you accept that when you put yourself out there passionately with your emotion, that it's like building a bridge. You might not get to the other side. The thing might collapse and and then you're just going to be stuck with a pile of mess. That's the path to get to the other side. There's not any other way to do it. So
you see this as the path to get to the other side, which is a more sustainable and healthy living.
Yeah, I would like to reach a state of homeostasis. You know, I think we as a society has been so pressed to grow and to expand and to, you know, just
bigger, better.
Yeah, wow. Ooh, I think if we could learn to perpetuate and exist, then we could find this profound human development that really needs to happen. Those monks in Tibet got stuff sort of figured, I think, in lots of ways. If we could just reduce the noise that's going on in our heads, and the competition, and the anxieties that pollution and all this activity is causing us, then that's the goal for me.
Yeah.
Is to find a way that everybody's got a roof on their head, everybody's fed, and we don't have to be in this mode of running as fast as we can all the time. Because I would like to enjoy the time we got here a little bit more instead of trying to
be exhausted.
Yeah, trying to
It's not
be more of a solution. I would like the humanity to be in a position where we feel like we are part of the solution.
Yeah, and I see that, that kind of energy is consciously and unconsciously conveyed within the sort of context of, the organization, because we've talked about this before, that when I've been here at public events and people come in and, there's people that's new people that come in, but there's always like this openness and acceptance, acceptance of me and my family, for instance, and then that's an example, and then also your regulars, so to speak, that kind of, that positive energy sort of gets transmitted to, other people, where there seems to be a lot of, communication and I would say a place where people feel comfortable being themselves, but yet are also, I think it demonstrates that there is this yearning for the, a type of life that isn't as complicated, that isn't as fast-paced, and like interacting with the land is really important, and it's like, it's that sort of synthesis of how it all comes together, that whether people consciously or unconsciously connect with that's something that's conveyed, and so I think you continue to be successful on that. But it's hard, to do that where you've got so much competition, going on. The rest of the world.
Well, I think there's a lot of questions in that question. I think in general, there's lots of it's palpable, the positive energy that can exude at times, palpable and contrary, having negative energy or whatnot. I think these types of energies, it's amazing, they seem like they're contagious within humanity. Go to New York City and walk through Manhattan, it's contagious that people will avoid you and not look at you, sit on the subway. Geez, it's scary that you could get that many people together and not look at one another. So, you go in contraire and really try to push that positive energy, and it feeds on itself. And it's contagious that way. And so if you can build that ball a rolling, it's quite good. by the same token, come apart like you wouldn't believe. Train wreck. Yeah.
Well, human relationships are always become very complicated.
Oh, I'll tell you what. Well, I mean, if you can tune it in, if you can get, a grasp of those vibes and so forth, I think, like you're saying, intuition or sort of experience in those realms, I think you try to use that to your advantage and mend fences and build bridges as you go.
Let me see. Now, I just wanted to check where we're doing here, awareness. Now, one of the things when we were back to talking about, I was interested is that how do you think that your awareness of yourself as as the sort of the director of the group leader, so to speak, I lost my train of thought there. But that, how do you think that your awareness or your lack of awareness about how your role as a leader is impacting on your relationships with individuals with a group, impact upon their perception of you?
It's interesting, really. I mean, this whole circumstance is so unique in some respects, and we're so fortunate in many respects to have gotten here. In terms of my role, I really feel like it is a case of fate. Sort of being at the right place and the right time. I look at lots of people who I grew up with. Imagine lots of people throughout history and throughout this country had the same aspirations. The sort of Swiss Family Robinson Crusoe combination where you get to Treasure Island and raise animals, and you all live together with your buddies that you grew up with, and tree houses, and
that's right.
Barbecues all the time, raise your own food, and don't have to go work for the man.
Mm-hmm.
I think that everybody in my generation had that dream, or talked about that over beers in their dorm room, or...
How old are you anyway?
41.
41? Okay.
So, I think, we all had forks in our backyards and wish we never had to leave. So I sometimes wonder why there's not more places like this, and why this isn't more prevalent.
Well, it takes, as you know, a lot of devotion and energy, and it's. I also think that there's, this is just my opinion, that there's a lot of pressure on people in society to succeed in a certain way. There's a lot of fear not to go down the established paths. And you took a really unique path, and it's worked out really well. Not that it doesn't have its difficulties, but you're the first one to admit how lucky you were, that your Aunt Edith and Uncle Dimber had this place, and that was the foundation. So that was my analysis. That's one of the big things, that helped a lot. Plus just having all the other, financial factors come together, and your vision at the right moment to be clear enough too to pull it off. So it is pretty unique, actually.
Yeah, it's very fortunate. I guess in terms of the question, though, what are we getting at? What is the root of the question?
Where were we? Well, we sort of got off talking about this. Oh, the impact of your relationships. Your awareness or lack of awareness of how this all comes together affects the perceptions of the group on you. That was the last part of the leader question.
Yeah. So, well, initially, when we started here, we were all sort of the same age group, and there was actually a couple guys that were, older than me, more my mentors. So that sort of dynamic has changed. I've gotten older, and lots of the people coming through are the same age I was when we started.
Happens to all of us.
So that definitely has affected the dynamics, and then the presumptions or assumptions or expectations that our society has of a farmer, of a leader, of a director. There's assumptions and baggage and expectations that go with those roles as well.
Very good. Now, what was one of the things I was interested about is, we talked about, I think, what attracts specific individuals to TA groups, and we talked about, wanting to, find a community or sort of like an alternative to like a family situation, intimacy and relationships. But how do you go about selecting people, and how do they select TA groups? We talked about this a little bit before, and you have the job descriptions, so that's sort of like the starting point. But I don't know, maybe to make it more specific, with, like, for instance, with Emmanuel coming in as he's a current example, is how did he gravitate towards the acres, and is his situation is that an apt illustration, or is he maybe just too unique? And then how do you go about selecting who's going to integrate into the group?
Well, the World Wide Web, of course, has changed things dramatically in just the time I've been here. When we first got here, there was a thing called the Willing Workers on Organic Farms, which was like a little publication.
Oh yeah, Wolf's
a little printed publication that was basically the connection to people that wanted to work on farms. And it was like, in New England, maybe 35, 40 farms, and the printed thing that got printed and sent out to maybe 100 or 200 people. It was just a drop in the bucket,
It's amazing they kept going.
Yeah, it is amazing that they have kept going. Now there's more of an online platform for that entity, but there's also a worldwide online platform. And then there's tons of other types of platforms, idealist.com, growfood.org. There's our own website, there's Facebook, and all these other sort of methods where people can find out about you. And then once they found out about you, then we have an application. And, the application comes with some readings and so forth to sort of get people's expectations in line with what we're doing here. And then we do phone interviews and on-site interviews. It's really great to meet people. We get a lot of applicants from far away, and it's harder and harder to accept them without having that prerequisite.
You don't want to just accept somebody on a phone interview.
It's harder and harder to do that. We've been, just through time. I mean, when we first started, we would literally accept anybody who wanted to come. And just not going to do that anymore. There's trying to improve the success rate above Vegas, and so it's really important that we get try to communicate with people what our expectations are, and have them articulate what their expectations are, so we can see if this is going to work. And then beyond that, get here, and we all have to work on our personality differences, and how we define and perceive this world, in regards to work, in regards to community living, in regards to sharing the space. So,
yeah, that's a lot.
It's an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, because it's not like you go home at the end of the day, and you don't have to see those people for the next 12 hours.
Or get a weekend, break. It just doesn't happen.
So that's interesting. So that's one of the things you've learned about running a community, from that whole process.
Well, I think, you've got this sort of, this perception that, I think it's a scientific approach to addressing community.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have this, like, we're in the microcosm, but me living in it, it's not like you're running community. It's like you're like swimming with the tide,
trying to flow.
Trying to figure out what to do next. You really don't have that observation or sense that you're running anything other than you're part of something that's happening, and you're trying to channel your energy best within that.
Yeah, that's cool. Because it is that is you're inside of anything. It's really hard to sort of be able to look at it from that kind of sort of macro thing, because it's you've got all that dynamic going on, and that's one reason why I enjoyed coming down and being here at other events, because it at least gives me a little bit more of a perception of, instead of just here I am, do my dissertation work, and this is what I've read, because that's not what I want to do at all, and it really is necessary to sort of be more on the inside, so you can feel it. But when you're talking about like not necessarily having the luxury to think about things, even running any kind of organization, right? Is sometimes when you just need to have people there to do things, you just have to go with the flow, and somebody shows up and they seem like they're okay, and it's like, hey, you don't have time to analyze whether this is going to be, lifelong commitment or not. Let's
get to work.
Yeah. So what do you think of, we've talked to some of the challenges, but for you, what has been the biggest joys and rewards about this whole process? And, is it the Swiss Family Robinson thing, or what is it you see?
Yeah, the Swiss Family Robinson thing is cool. I think that, you get a lot of commendations from people coming through. People are very excited about the whole thing, and really think you're cool. But it's sort of a double-edged sword in some respect, because you wonder, like, well, where are you guys coming from? Like, it feels like there should be more of this going on, or more opportunities for people to have this. This shouldn't be so unique. So that's depressing in its own way. But I think, it's exciting to be part of something that's innovative. And it's exciting to try things and be challenged by these things versus, I guess, I just don't, I would be awful distressed and despondent if we weren't trying something. So I think that's the challenge of sort of answering up to our potential is worthy. I think humans have a lot of potential, and I don't think we're there yet. So
right,
keep going.
Put a lot of work in there.
Yeah.
Now, when we talked before when I was here about the concept of liminality, meaning that's when people see themselves as coming into an environment and seeing themselves sort of like in a transformative state, like separate from their former state of existence, and then they integrate that into their sense of self. And do you see, when you have the various people that have folded in and out of the acres over the years, how do you see? Have you observed how people negotiate that, or has that been like something you've been conscious of, or do you think even individuals are conscious of it?
It's hard to tell, where everyone is on the continuum, on their journey and their life continuum. What, years later, did their experience at the acres, was that a pivotal moment? Or tours here, pivotal moments for people. People So, you know, I definitely heard people say things like that they had the revelations and stuff.
Oh, that's great.
You don't really know how and when people are affected, and you just try to pile it on when you get the chance, and try to add to the possibilities.
Yeah, because there must be it must be really satisfying when you realize that somebody's really into it and they have a lot of energy. You know, like it was really interesting when I was interviewing all you guys, Gina was talking about, that it was sort of funny when she knew exactly how long she'd been here, but then her other part of it is that she was, and I don't think you were there for quite all of it. I think I was talking to her alone a little bit, but she still feels like, there's, that you can tell she, her commitment and her connection, that she still has a lot to learn, and she feels like she still has, a lot that she can give the organization, and it must be, a satisfying feeling, I think, when you see that, because she's been here now, almost 5 years? Or what'd you say, 4 months? And it's 4 years, 7 months, or something like that.
She's got a count on it, though, yeah. I think she came in September, so that's how she keeps track of it. She came on her birthday. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely rewarding to see people go through the phases and to know that, like, they might not necessarily have the opportunity in life to gain this insight and this the depths of what goes on here. The depths being both good and bad, because I think it is. It's super valuable. And, it makes us all stronger and more empathetic. Yeah.
I think it's interesting is that, there's times when you have a lot of sort of intense frenetic activity, like when you have your community breakfast and the public events, because you got to sort of churn things out, but yet try to maintain that balance of being relaxed about it. But yet, there's that aspect of, what I observed is that things are slowed down enough where you can learn something. You can learn how to, the process of how to, get a group of crops ready to go, and how to prepare the soil, and where it's a lot of people. It's almost like a luxury in a way, because so much in modern day life doesn't allow people to sort of slow down and learn how to do specific tasks that really sort of fit into a holistic way of living. So I think that's really, really valuable.
Yeah, I think, in lots of senses we set the stage for that by being experimental, by being educational, by opening those doors. I don't think that necessarily goes on conventional farms. I think it's sort of been a part of the design is to be catalyze and incite that kind of activity. So you need that creativity.
Yeah, you talked about that, about your own process, about that you had to learn how to do all these things, to teach yourself how to do all these things, and that I think that the people that are here really value that opportunity to learn how to broaden their own skill set, by just out of necessity, and being in an environment again where the education is supported.
Yeah, I don't think it ever stops.
Yeah, it goes on and on and on. Right. Now, the big question here, just what do you see? How would you like to see the acres evolve, and then, you as a whole?
That's definitely the question that is potentially the most difficult, and potentially another one that's so loaded with sort of a preconception. I guess I continue to see the place evolving. And then it becomes to me some sort of question, like, with the process of aging and human life, I don't think it's really going to be possible that it stops. It might be nice to, sort of get on the level where things are not so transitory and perpetually in motion. But I would think that there's always going to be an evolution to this place based on the peoples. The landscape, is going to change, and fruit trees get bigger and bloom and eventually die.
Your mom was talking about this, even though it's like, seems like it's far off, about how to create more housing. That's part of the, within the farm as a whole. And she was talking to me about the difficulties of that. So, that's that kind of evolution. We're creating more, a larger group of sort of, more or less permanent inhabitants, I guess. So that's interesting.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's zoning, space, population. And, I see the population maybe getting some permanence and some more permanent dwellings and so forth. But eventually those people are going to get up and die. And then so who's coming in next? What of that generation, or first generation, second generation, are families? And do they have children? And what's going to transpire there? So
it'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
Sure. We'll see what our grandchildren have to say.
And last time we talked, you had talked about the, because I asked you the question, which I'm going to ask you again, is where do you see your individual goals in this? And, you had said that, you go through these various phases, where you see your own connection to D acres, and sometimes you feel really down, and then you sort of go through a sort of a process, and then you become more grounded again. And then, so I get the sense that you're feeling a lot more sort of positive and grounded than you were when we talked about it before. So, so how are you feeling about that now?
Well, I think some of that is just, internal meter and all that, going through the process. There's definitely a lot of doubt and anxiety and uncertainty that's going to plague experimental organizations. And it's relentless in lots of respects. And so when you're looking to get beyond that, when you're really, you don't see like a lot of examples out there, you don't see a lot of other success stories. This was what we knew getting into it. It was never thought that this was going to be an enduring. I think from the outside, maybe I had some hopes and aspirations, but I don't think that was ever really. Looking back on it, it has been a tremendously long and fruitful, challenging journey. But there's steep odds. And so, I think it's important to take it seriously and to, not be flip about it. Take the time to reflect and learn from experience. And so I think part of challenging yourself is challenging yourself to do that reflection and take that time. And I'm not sure there's always a positive way to internalize criticism. We were talking about this earlier. If things affect you, then they're real, you know.
Yeah.
And so I don't think there's any way to deny something that's real. It's something that you have to deal with. And so there are many elements of this project that I find less than appealing. But just going back to it with your eyes open, knowing the alternatives and knowing the ramifications, and you move forward.
Yeah, that's great. What was I going to say? I think that we have one more question. Is I think we sort of talked about it, but then just to clarify it, how do you see the acres in comparison to other intentional communities that you've been involved with? I know there's I don't know anything about them, just Dancing Bones and Wentworth.
Yeah, I think it's a little too close to home to, more or less compare and contrast. I mean, there's definitely different intentions in terms of like Dancing Bones up the way. It's a little bit more residential in nature, and I think in general, the founder syndrome, the sort of the dysfunction that is a result of highly motivated, charismatic people that start places that then get sort of trapped by that circumstance. That's a real thing. That's going on all over, and it specifically getting by that first generation of leaders is something that we haven't licked for. I mean, you look, this will be the challenge for a lot of those places that were started in the 70s are coming up on the turnover time. So we'll see.
Well, even in Finhorn, because I'm pretty good at Finhorn, that they had a group of people that they're now getting pretty old, that are still there, the original founders, but they must, it's interesting. I think one of them is retiring, and so obviously there has to be somebody cultivated up to take that, because that's a huge organization, and it'll be very interesting to see how, I don't know how much I'll be able to get a sense of that, but it's like, that's been around since the 70s, and so you have to have that type of thing. And that's what we talked about in the beginning, is that sort of, that charismatic leader thing is, anthropological studies, that's, one of the big things in any sort of intentional community, and even in, even looking look at like maybe the colonial period. Some of the colonies were sort of intentional communities without really thinking of themselves as that. And if things went wrong with their leader, the whole place would go crazy. There's a lot of emotion, and then it gets rehashed. So, it is true. That's sort of like that grounding and realizing, how that sort of fits into the larger dynamic probably helps navigate that complicated web of relationships as well.
Yeah, it's weird with the founders of the catalyst, the sort of the glue as well as the gunpowder. And so it could be
that's great. I like that glue and gunpowder.
Messy combination.
That's wonderful. Well, I think that's all of my questions for today. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we should have more of these sessions, so I could think about some more of this stuff. So.
That'd be great.